A good father is a master of many trades, balancing love, discipline, and dreams for his family. Reed Markham. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live at 5:30 in the morning, then I especially thank you for giving me your time so early. All right, folks, what in the heck is going on? 5:30 in the morning, 5:41 in the morning, and I'm streaming? I'm like 2 hours early. What happened here? Well, here's what happened. We're at the end of the month. It's crunch time. You know that I am trying to get my hours in by the end of the day. So I have remaining 3.3 hours to get in today in order to fulfill my obligation for the Rumble Premium program. I'm sorry, the Rumble Creator Program. Still a little early. Working on getting that little limited amount of caffeine that I consume into my system. At any rate, it just so happened that after doing a stream last night, I was reached out to by another dad who said, "Hey, this week I've got some availability." And I said, "Is that so?" And then I was like, "Well, could you do tomorrow night?" And he was like, "Yes." And I explained the situation. And he was like, "I got you, man. How about we do it in the morning? And then that'll make it a little bit easier for you to figure out what else you need in the evening, kind of switch it around a little bit," which works out well for me mostly. I still had to get up early. So there's that. But I had to do a lot less prep. So helps out tremendously. Today, we're going to be talking to Todd Hagopian. He's going to talk about writing his book. He's going to talk about fatherhood in general, a father of 4 boys, and he'll talk about business and politics, just kind of a wide range of stuff. So please welcome as Todd joins us for the show. All right, Todd, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Very good. How are you, sir?
I'm here. That's all I'm going to say. So so what we've so what we're going to talk about today is just all kinds of stuff. You've got 4 boys, and if I understand correctly, I don't think we've ever really talked about this, but you run multiple businesses, correct?
Yeah, actually, I spent several years running multiple businesses. I still have a couple, but I'm actually back in corporate America right now. So I sold off a few. I'm back in corporate America and kind of running a couple on the side.
Okay, awesome. And then you have 4 boys, and you were involved in the in national party politics. So you're doing quite a lot.
Yeah.
So you're wearing many, many hats. So you're going to tell us how we all can wear that many hats and do
Sure.
everything that you do today.
Right.
And, you have a book that you've written, where did that title go? I saw it,
That's all right. The hypomanic toolbox
yeah,
is
the
the first one.
Hypomanic Toolbox. So that'll be fun to get into. All right, so let's start with being a dad. How long you don't have to tell me all the kids' name
Yep.
ages,
Yep.
just how long have you been a dad?
Sure. Yeah. So I have four boys, all boys, and the first one was born way back in 2012. So he is about to turn 13 here next month. So it's about 13 years, and they're all about 18 to 24 months apart. So
Okay,
we
gotcha.
went fast.
Awesome. So you ended up with 4 boys. Like, sometimes you hear about, like, the dad that's got, like, 4 girls. It's
Yeah.
like he's like, "I'm the only testosterone in the house." And unfortunately, it seems like it's your wife, unless you have some pets, who
Yeah.
happens to have the only estrogen in the house.
Yes,
So
yes. We actually do have four dogs and four cats as well. So we
wow.
do have quite a few girls in the house, but only one that she would call that.
Right, right, yeah. So, wow, 4 dogs, 4 cats, 4 boys.
Yep.
Holy moly, you guys just like the number 4 apparently.
Yeah, yeah. It is a very loud house, very active house. Not a
Oh
whole lot of
goodness.
rest.
So how do you manage?
Yeah,
Like, how do you I'm not even sure where to start in all of that.
yeah.
So so
Go ahead.
tell me about okay, okay, I know where to start. Tell me about when you got started as a dad
Yeah,
compared to now. So you presumably you didn't have, multiple
right.
businesses and all this other stuff. And then tell me how you grew into being able to do so many different things.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. In 2012, it was a mistake, of course. We planned on having several years where it was just us, and then we had the boy, and it was like, okay, now we might as well get them all out of the way in a hurry,
Right.
so we don't have 25 years of diapers. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so the first one came a little earlier than we thought. I was in, a corporate job. I was making six figures. It was okay from a financial standpoint, but it was definitely different than what we
Mhm.
had planned. I was traveling a lot. I was probably on the road 2 or 3 times a week for 2 or 3 days, or sorry, 2 or 3 times a month for 2 or 3 days a week. Not terrible amount of travel, but probably in the 30 to 40% range.
Mhm.
And so that took a lot of getting used to because we decided she was going to stay home, so she stayed home with the boy. No adult contact and stuff like that. That was hard on her to get used to that part of
Right.
it, and then I had to get used to I couldn't say no to work related travel, so it was an interesting conversation every time it kind of happened because it was definitely made her life harder and
Right.
theoretically made my life easier every time I left, right? Because I don't have the kid to work through and
Right.
all that stuff. So it was definitely that was one of the biggest changes. Everyone asks like, how is it to have four boys? It's still the hardest one is still your first. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Where you go from 0 to 60.
Mhm.
So and so it was good. It worked out fine, just like everybody else. Every person figures out how to get through the first, and then we decided to have a second, and obviously that's a big decision for a family,
Mhm.
um, but for the most part, how our family worked is I would work 8 to 6:30. That's just kind of the hours we put together. I
Mhm.
would come home, help with the boy until 9 or 10, and then kind of 10 o'clock they would go to bed, and that's
Mhm.
when I would do all my other stuff, whether it's politics or running businesses or starting businesses, and that's kind of the schedule that we had worked out at that
Mhm.
point.
Gotcha. Yeah, we don't really have a schedule per se. Um, and we have 1, and we're not gonna be getting to 4. If we did get another one, we would probably adopt. I think
Yeah,
we're both a little bit on the older side, and we wouldn't wanna, put any, health risk out there
sure.
for well, it'd
Yeah,
be actually on her. There'd be no
yeah.
health risk on me. Maybe the stress, and that's about it. Probably not a lot to complain about. But, and so, we kind of have our schedule-ish worked out and,
Yeah,
because he's gotta go places.
yep,
Now what I've been told by people that have more like 3 or more kids,
yeah.
they say when you get to that level, generally it's actually a lot easier because the older ones help take care of the younger ones. Do you find that same thing?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that have four have kind of like two pairs, two
Okay.
older and then two much younger because they decided to have more. Ours are so close together that we really didn't get that until about a year ago, because
Okay.
we have, I think it's 7, 9, 11, 13, basically at this point. And so, 2 years ago, the oldest was still 11. It's hard to do babysitting and stuff at that age,
Mhm.
but right around that age is when they started helping out a lot more. And so now we do see that, like, we can go upstairs for a couple hours and watch a movie, and we're not getting talked to every 10 minutes. It's more like every 20 minutes. Something happens. So
Right.
um, so you get a little bit more relief, but we could go out and get a bite to eat and stuff like that, and they know how to phone call and they know how to get themselves out of trouble and stuff like that. So that is a big help. We probably didn't get that though till the last year or two. So yeah, there's definitely a little bit of that, and then you have the opposite side, which where you feel a little bad because they tend to play together much more than like your isn't a boy your boy
Yeah. Yeah.
goes out, and he probably has friends that he goes and sees and this and that. Like there's not as much of that when you've got three or four clustered together because
Mhm.
they're always together. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
And so that's a great thing because they always have somebody to play with. But then at a certain point, you start to regret it a little bit because it's like they don't all have their own friends. They all have the same friends.
Mm.
So they're not out and about and they're not having their own life as much. And it is a little bit different. It
Mm.
takes some getting used to for you. You have to realize that they're having fun and it's okay. It's just what
Right.
they know. You know what I mean? But that has been a little different. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, we only have the one. He's 6.
Okay.
And
Yep.
so any friends that he gets to play with, either they have to we have to
Sure.
intentionally make an
Yeah.
effort because, most of his friends are not yet in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
We're working on getting him connected to, like,
Yeah.
there's some homeschool families. We're not a homeschool family
Yeah.
specifically, but there are some, and it seems to me that their children have the more availability because even
Yeah.
though we don't homeschool, we both work from home,
Sure.
which means, when he's not in school,
Right.
then, he's here or unless we're taking him somewhere, so he's got
Yeah.
a few activities that we like to take him out and do.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, I don't wanna push, time forward,
Right.
but I am looking forward to when he can maybe, when he's, like,
Sure.
8 maybe, and he can say, "I'm gonna go down the way and play
Yeah.
with so and so." Okay,
Right.
cool, like, that'll be
Yeah.
nice, because then he'll have just a little bit more freedom, a little bit more, interaction with other people, because sometimes he's here by himself and
Yeah.
he's like, "Dad, will you play with me?" And I'm like, "Dad, he
Right.
can't. He's
Right.
struggling to finish his
Right.
podcast for today."
Exactly.
You
And
know?
six is a hard age because they'll come home and they'll say, "I want to play with Danny," and you'll be like, "Great, who's Danny? Do you have his phone number?" And they're like, "No." And then
Yeah,
you're like,
yes, and he
"Okay,
gets
can
your
you go to
mommy's phone.
school?" Yeah, can you go to school and get his phone number? And then for like 3 weeks, I forgot, and
Right,
then
right.
finally you get the phone number. We had one the other day came up and was like, "I'm going to so and so's house tomorrow."
Mhm.
And we're like, we don't even know who that is. We have never talked to their parents. Like,
Right,
they just, they think they've done it. They think they finally cracked the code on how to go to the friend's house, but then they haven't had any of the information.
right.
It's a funny age.
Right, then they haven't got that conversation between parents where one of the
Right.
parents embarrasses their kid by asking a bazillion questions.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
mom did that to me. She was like, "Oh, you wanna go and have a sleepover with one of your
Right.
friends?
Yeah.
Do you have any guns? Do you this?"
Right.
Parents
Yeah.
gonna be there, but I'm like, "Mom, stop asking all those questions."
I know.
Now here I am getting ready to ask the
Yeah.
same one. Well,
Exactly.
maybe not getting ready, but,
Yeah.
looking forward to it. So, okay, cool. So you have multiple businesses. How do
Yeah.
and then now you have businesses on the side, you're working for a
Yeah.
company. You've got a book out. Tell me about the book. The hypo you the hypo
Yep, hypomanic toolbox. Yep. So it's an interesting story. It'll probably go back into fatherhood as we dovetail back and forth. But
Mhm.
for a long, long time, there was definitely something wrong. Like my head was just not right. I would go through spells of working a ton and then not being right for a long time. And anybody who knew me during that time, and you probably did for a period, it could just see that there was like cycles, right?
Okay.
Real a ton of action and then a ton of non-action. And essentially, what finally happened through a series of bad things, but is that I got diagnosed as bipolar.
Okay.
So I was for 15 years kind of going up the corporate chain. Every time something great would happen, something bad would happen, and I kind of kept going up, but there was a lot of negativity as I went
Mhm.
through. And then I got diagnosed as bipolar, and I was at the time a global marketing director for ITW, and I was about 35 at the time. Um, and so I was doing really well, but just had these,
Mhm.
spurts and stops. And what happened is, but I was very productive. I mean, this is when I was working 21 hours a day. I was barely sleeping.
Mhm.
Like I was just able to get a lot done. Had all kinds of side projects going on. I didn't have the businesses as much. I had a couple, but nothing major.
Mhm.
Um, and then I went on the medicine, and the medicine took me from way up here to all the way down. Like basically a 20-hour work week turned into an 8 hour, or a 20-hour work day turned into an 8 hour work day. You know, um, these huge goals and these grand ideas, grandiose, delusions of grandeur is what they talk about, with bipolar, right? So I had these grandiose goals. I would just take this small project and turn it into something magic. Like that all went away. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden I was just kind of normal. And I always joke around, I kind of started to suck. Like I was no longer this high flying guy. It was just kind of like I went to work, I did my stuff, I went
Mhm.
home, I was tired, I went to bed, like it was, it was really normal. And I had to teach myself how to manage bipolar, manage like I was still bipolar while I was on the medicine. So I came up with this toolbox of ways to continue to manage like I was hypomanic, which is what they call
Mhm.
the good part of bipolar, where you're kind of high and you're working hard and you're having all these ideas and you're executing. A lot of people can manage that really well. But then you have the downside of bipolar, which is the depression and all the stuff
Mhm.
that goes with that. And so the medicine was managing both of those. So it was cutting the highs way down, it was cutting the lows way up.
Mhm.
And I had to teach myself to kind of manage like I did before. That's where the hypomanic toolbox was born. And that was about 11 years ago, 10, 11 years ago. Um, and so I used that just for myself. So I took those tools, I kept managing that way, and it was more of a reminder to, when you see this, you manage this way. Like you have to act like you've got these delusions of grandeur, and you have to
Mhm.
act like you're working 20 hours a day, and this and that. And I kept turning around businesses at that point. That was right when I was about to start turning around businesses. So I got
Mhm.
my next promotion, was then a business unit manager, where I was managing the business, the $50 million business that I used to be a
Mhm.
global marketing director for. And it worked. And so I turned around the first one. I went and turned around the second one, turned around the third one, and now I'm in the middle of the fourth turnaround. And then this year I decided, like, I had never come out as bipolar to anyone, so no one
Mhm.
knew. You know what I mean? And that's not a
Right.
great place to be when
Right.
you're bipolar, because it's better that people know, so that if they start to see stuff, they can say something, because you don't always see yourself spiraling back into the problem.
Mhm.
And so I decided it was good for my health to come out. It was good for mental health in general to come out, to let people know that it's okay to have divergent thinking, and
Mhm.
that it actually helps you in different ways in the workplace. So I had kind of that motivation. And then also I was like, I think I can teach people this. Like after doing it 4 times now on medication, I think I could actually teach, DL to implement this toolbox, in a way that he could do so healthfully, and actually take himself above, his competition. And so I decided to self-publish it, which
Mhm.
is a much more expensive version of publishing than I realized.
Right.
Um, and I had actually started to write a second book, and then started to write a third book, because I'm bipolar, so I'm writing all these books. And then,
Right.
but but what happened is I ended up getting a little bit of traction, and I talked to a publisher, and he cut a 3 book deal
Mhm.
for these 3 business transformation books, which essentially is what it is. It's a book about business transformation more than it's about bipolar. It's about how to take these tools and turn around businesses. And that's where we are. So we slowed down the process a little bit, but got it a lot less expensive. And now we're doing more of a hybrid, they call it, but more like a traditional publishing,
Hmm.
route. And so that book will be pre-order in October and it will launch in January. The first book is a business fiction book, which
Hmm.
is kind of actually a very powerful niche in business. But what you do is you take a business concept, you put it into a fiction
Hmm.
novel that is a lot easier and faster to read and easier for people to recall and grasp because they'll remember the story behind the thing. And then we transition into a nonfiction book where we deep dive into the actual system that I've put together.
Hmm.
That'll be number two. That'll come out in July of 26. And then the third book is a contrarian leadership book where you basically go against the grain and say, this is how you actually execute the
Hmm.
system. And that one will come out in January of 27. So it's kind of it's a trilogy of fiction, nonfiction, and then leadership book on how to get it all done.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm looking at the book, so I pulled it up on the screen, and we'll put it back there again. Let's see. There we go. Hypomanic toolbox. There you go, folks. Let's see. Is this the one that scrolls a little bit? There we go. I think that's the one. Yeah. So the hypomanic toolbox. Sorry, I've got multiple windows here that I'm
Yep, no
managing.
worries.
So this declare war on stagnation. So this looks interesting. I mean, look, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but the cover actually is kind of like, wow, I kind of would like to read that, just by the cover alone. And then your description is kind of interesting because if I understood it correctly, for the typical person who doesn't have bipolar,
Yep.
they might be able to apply these strategies and just simply be more productive.
That's exactly right. Like
Yeah.
how I usually tell people is there's basically 10 strategies inside the book. I
Mhm.
can't even rattle them off yet because I'm not there, from a interview standpoint, but there's about 10 strategies in the book. And those are things that I was doing kind of simultaneously, but not always. You'd get into a turnaround and only four of these strategies would be relevant. And then
Okay.
this other turnaround would be four different strategies. So this is four strategies worth or four turnarounds worth of strategies that I had developed. But what I tell people is like, I don't care if you take one or two of these and just decide you're going to get really good at
Mhm.
these one or two. It will take you and put you ahead of the peers because what it's all about is doing things at an extreme level. And so you're not going to be able to do all 10. Even I, when I was working 20 hours a week, couldn't do all 10 at an
Right.
extreme level. It's about going extreme on a few. And that's that whole war on stagnation. So
Mhm.
what I tell people is like there's two real big types of consulting in business, right? There's growth consulting for the companies that are going really fast and want to
Mhm.
keep going at a breakneck speed. And then there's crisis consulting where you're all of a sudden losing $5 million a year and you got to figure it out in the next 2 years,
Mhm.
or you're in trouble. And for the most part, I've done crisis turnaround, not consulting, but I take the business and I do the crisis turnaround. So we're just, throwing everything at it and trying to turn around the business. What I found in my last couple of turnarounds is there's this huge mushy middle of people who are in this stagnation state. They
Mhm.
used to be a growth company. They're not quite bad enough to be a crisis turnaround company yet,
Mhm.
but they've got the stagnation syndrome, is what I call it, where there's all these different things that are happening to them slowly. That's taken them from $10 million a year down to $5 million a year.
Mhm.
And what I found is it's a whole lot easier to turn around a company that's still making $5 million a year than it is to turn around a company once they start losing $5 million a year.
Mhm.
And so the whole point of this trilogy is let's talk about those companies that are starting to lose their talent, that are starting
Mhm.
to not innovate, that are starting to they're so successful over here, they don't want to break it to get up over here. And that's what declaring war on stagnation is all about. And the
Mhm.
way you declare war on stagnation, if you think about it, what is stagnation? It's timidity. It's you're being comfortable where you are, and you don't want to move off of it. So the best way to break anything is to do the exact opposite. And
Mhm.
so the exact opposite of that is coming extreme on one or two or 10 issues.
Mhm.
And so that's what this book is about: is how do you attack stagnation? Your company might only have two of the symptoms. That's great. Attack those two with extremity, and go after it, and you can really have a huge business effect. Because if you take a company who's good at everything else, but then has suddenly had 2 years of innovation dip where they just haven't had anything happen because they're scared to make a decision or something like that, and you
Mhm.
start making decisions, you can turn that company around really fast. If you've suddenly lost all your talent and you realize that that's the issue, and you, instead of replacing that person with somebody the same, and you take that opportunity to reorg the whole thing and figure out who you can hire to make 5 people more effective, and you build that talent back up in a transformation team mentality, you can completely change the way that company comes back from losing the talent. And that's what the books are about, and that's that declare war on stagnation.
Gotcha. It's interesting. You are now the second dad to come on Dead Talk who has bipolar.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, yeah. So back in, let's see here. This is when I was doing it more by season and episode, but I think it would be the 103rd podcast episode. It was back in season 3, episode
Yeah.
36. I don't do it that way now. I just number them. But Will Walter came on the show.
Okay.
And what's interesting is he was or is a salesperson. He's
Yep.
involved in
Mhm.
sales, and it just seems to, what is it about, like, sales and business that attracts men, and I presume
Yeah.
women too, maybe,
Mhm.
with bipolar?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that you mentioned that, because that's another thing I found is, and I obviously can't say names, but a bunch of people have come to me and been like, "Hey, by the way, I have it too," or I have something else, some
Mhm.
other kind of divergent thinking, and I know what you're going through. It's not quite as
Right.
bad, and blah blah blah. It is really common, and in fact, if you go back in history, there's a lot of people who have either had bipolar that have been big business people, or who everyone suspect had bipolar, because it wasn't as easy to get diagnosed and think you were just crazy,
Right.
before. But there's a lot of people that have those tendencies, and there's even now some syndrome that's like right below bipolar that they call, because of this hypomania. So that's the answer to your question, though, is this hypomania. So it's hard to describe it to people who don't know it. So what I wrote in my kind of prologue in the book was, it's like driving 100 miles an hour down a dirt road at night with no streetlights. Like you're just going so hard, and you're not feeling like you're going hard, and you feel like all you can do is go faster.
Mhm.
Every idea is great. I'm going to go after it. I'm going to get this done. And if you have that mentality, you tend to, what I always say is, if I'm shooting for 100% growth and I get 60% growth, and DL's shooting for 12 because he's under promising and over delivering and getting 15, I might have missed my goal, but I'm getting the promotion. You know
Right.
what I mean? Because I had 60% growth.
Right.
They're going to start to know that I'm going to promise up here, and I'm going to land somewhere down here, and I'm still going to be 4 times, 5 times bigger than this person. And so that's why people tend to do better in business, is because of this hypomania, where they're just going 100 miles an hour. They're setting huge goals. They might be missing them, but they're still coming in way ahead of
Mhm.
the competition. And it doesn't really get you until it gets you. And that's where you hear about these folks who are like, everything was perfect, da, 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 and all of a sudden, they went on a bender, and they got a divorce, and they did this and they did that, and all of a sudden it's like, why would you do this? You know what I mean? Like, everything in your life is so perfect. You're making $5 million a year. Why would you do this? And I'm not saying they're all bipolar, but I'm saying that hypomanic, drive, and
Mhm.
then the sharp fall is very symbiotic of people that have these bipolar episodes where they go hypomanic for, it could be weeks. There are weeks that I can not remember, because if you're bad enough bipolar, which I was, you would literally have a week or two where you couldn't remember. I'd be
Mhm.
working 21 hours a week, have no idea what I was doing. And when I snap out of it, you dive into this deep depression, and then you're just a completely different person, and
Mhm.
and that gets you in trouble in business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden I set goals for myself when I was hypomanic, and
Mhm.
now I'm completely depressed, and I can't even think about how to get out of bed, and now I got to hit these goals that I set for myself, and that tends to be that cycle that
Mhm.
eventually gets you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I would say that's why I've seen a lot of people in business, and a lot of people at the director level. You know what I mean? Because they get there in a hurry, because they're just better and they're working harder than
Mhm.
everybody else. And then you get to that director level, and that's where you can't have those bad 2 weeks anymore.
Mm.
And they get stuck there, and that's the most common level, and that's essentially where I was when I got diagnosed. You know what I mean? So, but you're right. There's a lot of us out there. I've met a ton of people And it doesn't even have to be bipolar. There's ADHD. There's all kinds of other stuff that
Yeah.
has similar, but maybe not as wild of swings, but similar types of
Right.
things that people have come and talked to me about. But there's a lot of us out there.
Yeah. No, it's funny that you're describing this,
Mhm,
and like, I'm not bipolar.
mhm,
I actually like to call myself neurotic
mhm.
just because my mind can go places and I can be headstrong about things. And, one moment, I'm fine. The next moment, I'm riddled with anxiety
Yeah,
and I'm worried about something, and my friends are, so I just can kind of mentally be
yeah,
all over the place. Um, but it's funny, I used to go and talk to doctors and I would try to describe
yeah,
kind of like how I felt. And what I do is I often describe myself in comparison to other people.
sure,
So
yeah,
here's how I described myself, which I have stopped doing. I would say, "Well, you know how somebody's." I'm gonna see if I give them hands in the camera there. You know how somebody might have a high here and somebody else might have a low here? Well, I feel like mine are a bit more spread out
yeah,
than other people. They're like, "Oh, is
yeah,
that so?" They're like, "Have you ever considered you might have bipolar?" And I'm like, "Have you considered I might wanna whip your ass?"
yeah,
No, I don't really say that, but that's kind of like my mentality because 'cause I'm like,
yeah.
"Oh my god, stop suggesting that."
I know. Yeah,
Um, but for me, I got diagnosed with ADHD and, like, several other things.
sure. Yeah,
Like, every time I talk to them, 'em, they've got a new diagnosis, so I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah,
"You know what? I'm done talking to you people. You put
yeah.
me on medication, it made me go
That's right.
crazy. So, no, we're done with this."
Yeah,
So I just leave it at neurotic.
yeah,
That's where I am, so I can kind of feel, I kind of understand what you're talking about because there are times where my productivity, it doesn't shoot up like in some like skyrocketing, man,
right.
he's working
Yeah,
20 hours a day.
yeah,
Um, but I do have moments of high productivity where it
sure.
just seems like 1 hour I will do something that like on other days I couldn't seem to do in
Yeah,
four.
right.
It's
Exactly.
crazy.
Yeah.
So,
And you're right. They do come up with new stuff all the time, and it's hard to sometimes take it seriously. It's
right.
hard to think that you're that, and like when I first got diagnosed, I went in with a enormous headache. I had the worst headache of my life. I was definitely under stress. Like I couldn't
Mhm.
figure out what was going on, but I could barely open my eye for like a week. Right? It was like that
Wow.
kind of headache, and so they threw everything at it. We were doing CAT scans and MRIs and
Mhm.
all doing all this stuff. And finally she goes, I think you need to talk to a therapist. And I'm like, what? Like we've got all these serious medical things going on. And
Right.
she, no, like everything I've heard, like I'm not a psychologist, but I think you need to talk to a therapist. So I went, and they were like, yeah, after the first one, they're like, you're like really bipolar. And I was like,
Right.
what are you talking about? And I'm like, screw you. And so I went to the second one and they're like, yeah, you're like really, really
Right.
bipolar. And I go, oh, okay. And then I went to a psychiatrist, same thing. Psychiatrist, basically like therapist without being nice. And then they
Mm.
just, prescribe the drugs, right? But he was like, yeah, this isn't really in question. Like, this is what you are kind of thing. But then since then, I've had a lot of people come up to me because there's some new diagnosis now that's like less than bipolar, like you get the hypomania, but you don't get the depression. And
Right.
and they're like, well, maybe you have that. And I'm like, no, I definitely had the depression. I'm like, but that would be really cool. Like, I'd love that. Whatever
Right.
that's called,
Right.
like, give me some of that. And so I think that's just like being really good at your job, like where you
Yeah.
where you can where you can amp it up. But anyway, even in bipolar, it's like there's bipolar one and bipolar two. Well, what's the difference? The difference is you've had a manic episode, and I'm like,
Mm.
no. The difference is you've had a manic episode and gone to the hospital. Like I'm
Mm.
almost certain I've had a manic episode, because there's
Right.
been weeks that I don't remember. My old boss, when I told her that I was bipolar this year, she goes, "Oh my God, that's so funny. I remember that one time that you told the Whirlpool directors that Whirlpool needed to buy Netflix." And, and she goes, that was the craziest thing I've ever heard. But you had this whole presentation on it, blah blah blah
Right.
blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, I don't remember that.
That's
like,
funny.
like you'd think that'd be something you'd remember,
Right.
because it's so stupid at the time. By the way, they were only $50 million. It probably would have been a brilliant acquisition for anybody, but
Right.
but it was such a dumb idea, like so ridiculous. I had this whole reason why, and she goes, it was a great presentation, blah blah blah. Obviously, we said no. I don't even remember doing it.
Mm.
And 10 years later, I don't remember. That's the one thing she remembered about me in that
Right.
role. You know what I mean? And I don't even remember it happening. So like bipolar is a different
Right.
than the other
So
things.
does it necessarily then affect, like, say, working memory um, for the experiences that you have? Is that where you tend to lose, memory of
Yeah.
things?
And I would say that not everybody with bipolar has the memory thing. That's like when you get really, really bad in the hypomania. And usually it all comes back to sleep, right? Like I
Mhm,
had probably gone 2 weeks with like 1 to 2 hours of sleep for 2 full weeks, by the time I would start blacking out, and not everybody gets there. And most people are smart enough to do something like if that's happening and
mhm,
get a little more sleep. But I was just kind of in that mode where I had been doing it for 15 years. It was just normal. Like I didn't think anything of it. If I
mhm,
was in one of those kind of tracks, it's why I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what, and I didn't much care to find out because it helped me win
mhm.
at work.
Right.
Um, so I haven't met a whole lot of people that had the memory thing, so I don't know exactly, how
Mhm,
common it is, but I definitely had it. But I would say that most of the time it wasn't that dramatic. You know what I mean? Most of the time it'd be like, oh, you raised your goal on that to 3 million from 2.5. And I would just kind of be like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then
mhm,
I'd write down like, okay, I'm at 3 million now. Like I need to find a way to get to 3 million. Like most of the time it was little stuff like that where I'd be in a meeting and I'd just be like, yeah, I can hit 3 million if you need me to, you
right.
know. And that's what I'd forget rather than some grandiose idea. Cause I wrote down a lot of stuff I knew I had to. So I'd write down things and I'd have PowerPoints for everything. So
Mhm,
usually I could go back and recall what I had shown somebody. You know
gotcha.
what I mean? So usually it wasn't like a Whirlpool by Netflix thing. That was pretty early in my bipolar journey.
Mhm.
So,
So let me ask you then, um, when it comes to bipolar, obviously in business, it has its strengths, obviously its weaknesses as
yeah,
well. Tell me about the strengths and the weaknesses within your family life, like
yeah,
with your spouse, for whichever stories and stuff,
sure.
obviously that you're
Yep,
willing to share. I get it.
yep.
But I'm just curious, like, do you have like, hey, we're gonna go on this this crazy experience, blah blah. Do you have the like? Do you just have those kind of plans, or is it kind of more limited to work?
Yeah.
What challenges do your
Yeah,
family
for
members
sure.
face?
It obviously affects you in very much the same way, but usually the what most people will catch it, like when you're talking to therapists and
Mhm,
whatnot, where they start to catch it, is where you just make dumb decisions. Um, Short-term gratification type decisions, right?
okay,
So like maybe you spend $2,000 on something, and it's like I would have never done that if I was thinking straight. You know what I
gotcha,
mean? That was $2,000. Are you kidding me? Like why would I do that? So there's some of
right,
that inside the family. Usually, I would say it affects the family in negative ways because you're doing some of that despite the family. You know what
gotcha,
I mean? So like maybe I went and gambled $2,000, or
mhm,
maybe I spent $2,000 because you know in 6 months I'm going to be president of the United States, and this $2,000 is going to help me be president of the United States. And
mhm,
like that was a very, very, by the way, popular delusion of grandeur in my head. You know what I mean? At like 32, I was going to be president when you're not even allowed to run.
right,
And that
right,
kind of thing. Like that's how ridiculous it gets. And potentially you spend a couple $1,000 kind of like hatching this 10-year plan and blah blah blah. That's how it would usually manifest. But then the other way it would manifest, and this is very popular, and one of the reasons people don't kind of catch it, one of the reasons I didn't for so long, is I was a huge, huge drinker,
mhm,
right? And doctors would ask me why I was drinking so much, and it's like, man, I worked so hard, I need to calm it all down. You know what
right,
I mean?
right,
And no one really put two and two together that I literally meant I need to calm it down. Like the brain was going so hard, I
mhm,
had to I could not sleep if it wasn't calm. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, I was drinking. A lot of people say they were heavy drinkers. Let's just say I was drinking more than probably the most, the heaviest drinker, like, and I was doing so for 15 straight years. Like it
mhm,
was no days off. And so the way I remember it affecting my family is like, I never thought I drank in front of my family because I kind
mhm,
of transitioned it after my second arrest, right? Because bipolar people will have that thing where they get arrested. My second arrest, I was like, all right, I got to start drinking at home. I
mhm,
got to start drinking at night. I got to start keeping everything in a box so that it's not affecting my day. And when the
mhm,
kids came, I just kind of pushed it later into the evening, you know. But then we have memories of like, one of the funniest things when my first boy was born is that he used to put his Legos in my drink. You know what I mean? Like we'd be sitting there watching a movie and he'd drop stuff into my gin and tonic. And so like clearly I was drinking because he was awake and it was a baby.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like so I was obviously drinking like immediately when I came home. I was thinking
Right.
I was putting it back into the night, but obviously I'm on like drink five, sitting there at 8:30 while we're watching TV with the baby.
Hmm.
And then of course my third son ends up disabled, right? And there turns into a whole lot of things that you have to have in the middle of the night, and that's where it became an issue because it's like I might need to take him to the hospital in the middle of the night. Well, I'm 3 sheets to win by 9, like,
Hmm.
and so I had to modify it more, and that's where it really, really started to become a struggle because it was like and then if I didn't drink, what happens? I was even more hypomanic, and like nothing ever slowed down the brain, and then I stopped sleeping and this and that, and so that's where it manifested inside the family. Was I could have probably done it with 2 kids with no disabilities. I probably could have gone another 10 years before it really went off the rails. The third
Hmm.
kid with the disability really was where it started to manifest bad. Either I was drinking too much to be effective if something happened, or I stopped drinking and then the hypomania kind of went crazy to
Hmm.
the point where the fall would be even harder, and that's where it
Right.
really started to lose control. And essentially that's when I stopped drinking. He was probably about 1.5. Maybe he was only 1 when I stopped drinking.
Hmm.
And that was when I got diagnosed and all that stuff. That was all corresponded together. So
Hmm. Gotcha. Okay. So basically, you're just self medicating.
yeah, that's essentially exactly what she told me, and that was one of the biggest ways that the 2 therapists figured it out. Is they started asking why I was drinking so much,
Hmm.
because I also told them I've quit like 5 times, and it's like I'll just quit and then I'll start again because I
Hmm.
like it, not because I'm shaking or anything like that.
Hmm.
And they were like, "Well, that's kind of weird," and then they dove into it. And as they started hearing me explain like why I was drinking so much, it was all about slowing down the mind and being able to get to sleep, and then, which by the way doesn't work because you drink and then you just stay up all night. But
Hmm.
that was in my mind. It was to slow it down and get to
Hmm.
where I could sleep a little bit, or at least calm myself down. And that was one of the biggest ways that they realized, like, okay, this is not, you're using this as medication,
Hmm.
and then it would be drinking plus NyQuil plus sleeping pill. Like I had to do all kinds of things to actually get to where I could sleep 3 or 4 hours a night,
Right.
and they started to figure it out. So
And so now you have, I presume, a better
yeah,
routine. Obviously, no. Do you drink at all anymore, or have you like you're like, hey, I'm done?
yeah. So I started on medication, and originally they were like, all right, this medication helps bipolar and it helps headaches. So this is perfect because you're having these terrible headaches, you're having bipolar. And I said, just give me the headache dose. Like now that I know about bipolar, no big deal. I'll just fix it. Obviously that doesn't work. So I took the headache dose. I kept drinking.
Hmm.
That medicine doesn't work well with drinking. Everything got worse. You know what I mean? And finally I got to the point where it's like, okay, I need to quit drinking. I need the bipolar dosage,
Hmm.
and that's when I quit drinking completely. And then that dosage can actually go like 10 times higher than that, depending on where you are in bipolar. So over the years, that kept going up and up and up. I have since gotten on to different medication, but essentially, like there was no way to go back to drinking because
Hmm.
I was taking so much of the medication that was contrary and to drinking. Like it just didn't do well together. And it was nice actually for me because, like I said, I always feel bad when I tell people I was an alcoholic because I probably was, but at the same time, I didn't have the symptoms that everybody else has. You know what I mean? Where I didn't shake, I didn't do this. Do I think about drinking all the time? Yeah, still think about drinking all the time because it was such a big part of my life for so
Hmm.
long. You know what I mean? And it does slow your brain down, and it feels good, and all this stuff.
Right.
But it wasn't like I had the shakes. I was drinking so much that they were terrified of what was going to happen when I quit. None of that stuff happened. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I didn't have that. So when people say, "How do you quit cold turkey?" I always feel bad about it, but like I literally just quit
Hmm.
because I decided to. You know, it still wasn't easy. I still think about it all the time, but it's not like I'm having the urge and I don't consider myself um, like a physical alcoholic where I don't know what people are talking about when they're talking about how bad it is to
Hmm.
to go through it. So I try not to put myself in that bucket, and it's more of like, it was a big change in my life. Essentially, is what it was for me. If that makes sense.
Gotcha. Well,
Yeah.
I would assume if you're taking medication and, effectively, if you're medicating with alcohol and then you're shifting over to your
Yeah.
medication, where you're medicating with, I guess, proper medication,
Yeah.
then I would assume that it's probably a little bit easier to make that transition
Yeah.
because your body's still getting something,
That's exactly right.
for what it is that you're trying to
Yeah.
resolve,
And
right?
that's exactly what they decided, once they realized that it wasn't hard for me, that's what they decided, was that the medication was basically doing what I was trying to do with the
Mhm.
alcohol anyway, just much more effectively, you know what I mean? And so it was actually a pretty healthy switch. And yeah, so
Right,
I try not to put myself in those categories because I feel bad because I know so many people struggle with it, and
right,
I did to a degree, but nothing like most people do. So
right. Yeah, it's interesting. Alcohol is kind of an interesting thing because I watch online. I'm online way too much,
mm,
for whatever, if that means of anything in this kind of a conversation. Um, and I recently myself said I'm done drinking.
yeah,
And I try to be careful because I know there are people out there that actually had, the traditional
yeah,
alcoholic problems, and
yeah,
I don't think that was me. Um,
right,
for me, it was a little different. I just was like, okay, it felt like I had a situation where maybe one drink would be fine,
yeah,
or maybe three drinks would be fine. Right, but it was a toss up. So, like,
yeah,
I could drink 1 glass of wine, wake up the
mhm,
next day and feel fine, or maybe not. Or sometimes I could drink 3 glasses of wine and wake up and feel fine, or
yeah,
maybe not. And I didn't like that inconsistency.
yeah,
So, eventually, and it was actually Easter Sunday, I had some
mhm,
friends over all day, and we just casually drank. I
yeah,
think for the whole day,
yeah,
right? Like, just slowly drinking. I had 1 bottle of wine. It's
yeah,
not really that much if you're
right,
hanging out with some friends. That's 4 glasses,
right,
right? You could do 2 glasses over a dinner. Super
sure,
simple.
mm,
So, I don't think it was that, but, like, man, that next day I woke up and I was just like, I felt like garbage. I think I actually did an episode, I think I called it the hangover episode, 'cause I was just into this program and I was like, "Man, I've got to deliver. I can't not do this, like, this is
yeah,
my way to, I'm starting to make some success here. There's small
yeah,
gains. I gotta have a rah." So I was like, "Hey, guys, I'm kinda hungover." But I wasn't hungover also in the traditional sense. It was more
yeah,
just I didn't feel good.
yeah,
So I gave it up, and now I feel like when I talk about it, I try to be careful and not
yeah,
diminish other people's real hard work,
yeah,
to get where they're getting. So I
yeah.
totally understand that.
And totally. And since I've had to deal with bipolar, I've been much different, about the alcohol. Because at first, if I did quit, I made a big deal out of it, like, oh, I'm
Mhm,
drinking so much and now I'm quitting and blah blah blah. And now I realize that it's different. And I've been with enough people, that have gone through it, that it's like,
mhm,
okay, it's different, and I need to at least delineate, their experience from my experience. And
mhm,
because I mean, I know people that drank 3 or 4, beers a night, and they're a much more serious alcoholic than I was, and I was
mhm,
drinking more than a liter a night. You know what I mean? Like, and so like I would just go through half gallons every day or two. You know what I mean? But I didn't have the same physical alcoholism that some of them have. It's just a very different. I had to change my habits. They had to change their.
mhm.
They were having physical symptoms that I wasn't having, and I try to just be a little careful about it. And there, it, I definitely like drinking. Like I could sit here right now and drink a half gallon. No big deal. And I would have a blast doing it.
Mhm,
But I'm not getting that pull for it.
mhm.
It's real easy for me to say no to the first one. I'm in business meetings all
Yes.
the time where people are drinking. And I have no. It's not like I can't go to the bar and watch other people drink. And I know some
Mhm.
people that would be impossible for.
Right. Yeah, I have noticed that if it's much easier to say no to the first one than it
Yeah,
is to the second or third one.
yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so that's kind of interesting. Now, on the topic of, like, say, self-medicating,
Hmm.
do you, since, and you can, again, any
Yeah,
question I ask, you can just be
sure,
like, "Hey,
no
that's,"
problem. Yeah.
but were there other kinds of stimulants or, was there any drug use or anything that
Mhm.
that you use to assist, or was just that not for you? Like, kinda where.
Yeah, no, I would say, I mean, obviously the number one stimulant that I was on forever that didn't, catch any red flags was caffeine, right? So
Mhm,
when you're working 21, 22 hours a day, you have to have caffeine because your body just can't go that hard, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, I drank 2 pots of coffee a day forever, and I still do at least 2 pots.
Mhm.
So, like this thing right here is, 40 plus ounces. I go through 2 or 3 of these a day of coffee. I'm drinking coffee right up until midnight when I go to bed. Like I've
Mhm.
got coffee, I'll slam it and then go to bed. So coffee, Monster, all that stuff. It has been a big part of my life for a long time. So that's how I help the hypomania, and the
Mhm.
heart work. And then on the tip side, because I couldn't fall asleep because the brain was going so fast. I've used NyQuil for years to fall asleep. Now I don't have to because I've got enough bipolar drugs that have sleep as part of it. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? And now I'm actually on a drug where it's like take as needed. So I need to catch myself when
Mhm.
I'm not sleeping. And if I fail to catch myself, then I need to take the drug every day. But right now it's more of an as needed thing. And so I've actually fallen into this, they call it, what's that diet where you eat 8 hours a day and then don't
Oh,
eat the rest of
intermittent
yeah.
fasting.
So they actually call this intermittent sleep, which is,
Mhm.
I don't know if it's really a thing, but the doctor told me, like, I think you're actually doing this by accident and don't realize it. So go research it. But basically, I'll take 2 3 hour naps a day. That's how I get my 6 hours in. So
Okay.
I go to bed at like 9 or 10 with the boys. I sleep till 1. I wake up, I work for a few hours, and then I sleep another 2 or 3 hours at night.
Okay.
So because of that schedule, I can't take the sleeping pills because I can't wake back up after the 3 hours. So
Mhm.
right now I don't take hardly anything unless I see myself slipping, and
Mhm.
then I'll start taking the thing that'll knock me out for 5 or 6 hours.
Mm. I
So
gotcha. Yeah, I
yeah.
think, if you split your sleep, I think it's called, like, biphasic sleeping or something
Oh,
like
okay.
that.
Yeah, I
Um,
haven't done enough research on it, but
yeah,
they
I
say
looked into it because I was a lot like I said, I don't consider myself bipolar,
right.
and I had to be careful how I was trying to describe
Yeah,
myself, but I'm definitely neurotic, if that's not really a
yeah,
formal definition of anything. But I'm definitely a neurotic person, and I had looked for different ways to adjust my sleep
yeah,
so that I could, perform more and deliver
yeah,
more. So,
yeah,
take that for whatever that's worth.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
okay, so I've met you
Hmm.
through politics.
Sure.
We're not gonna get into
Yeah,
like the party politics and the drama and stuff like that. So tell me, what is the draw to you as somebody who's already you've got several kids, you've
yeah,
got a wife, right?
mhm,
And that's a lot right there.
yeah,
And then you've got multiple businesses,
yeah,
and then whatever other pursuits that you might have, maybe that are smaller or
yeah,
whatever.
mhm,
Um, what is it that drives you to say, you know what? I think I should be involved in the political party because you were
yeah,
the treasurer for the
yeah,
National Libertarian Party.
yeah.
So tell me about your experience, like getting involved and then like
Sure.
hard charging that and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So politics was actually a very big trigger for me and bipolar, which I obviously didn't know until I was bipolar, but I was very involved in kind of super right wing, super
Mhm.
hardcore Republican politics when I was younger. I grew up in Ann Arbor, which is a true blue,
Mhm.
city inside of Michigan. And so I was always the contrarian, like I was always the one that disagreed with everybody. So I got very used to debating and that kind of thing, got deep into it. Actually ran for city council when I was 20 in Ann Arbor, and did okay. Didn't win, but did okay. And that kind of scratched the itch. I knew I could never be a politician in Ann Arbor. Blah blah blah. Down the road, moved it to a more conservative area. Then I got in my head like I could actually be a big politician if I wanted to. Started getting more into it. Wrote like crazy. I got all kinds of crazy things that people dug up over the years in libertarian circles and been like, look, this guy's a right wing crazy person. Yes, I was for a
Mhm.
long time. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but anyway, I wrote and wrote and wrote, constantly schemed about running for governor, running for president, doing this, doing that. When I got diagnosed, I realized that was a big trigger for me. Like as I got deep into politics, like that would be where I could easily work another 6 hours at night trying to figure
Yeah.
out how I was gonna do this or write something crazy and this and that. And so when I got diagnosed in 2016 ish, I basically kind of swore off politics for a little bit. You know what I mean? And like that 2016 election just really spun me out. That was one of the reasons I got diagnosed, because it went so bad for me. Like, it just wasn't good, and I had just um, after diagnosis, believe it or not. So take this for what it's worth, but I stopped being crazy and
Mhm.
then realized the Libertarian Party was for me. so, so that's usually the other way around. Like, people go
Right.
crazy and then go to the Libertarian Party. I stopped being crazy, looked at what I was doing in the Republican Party, and was like, I can't, like, I don't believe half of this. Like, let me go
Mhm.
out and find it. And so I found the Libertarian Party, got involved, but was terrified of actually getting involved because I
Mhm.
knew what it did to me. So I got hard involved at first. That's where the whole Libertarian in Chief popped in. Right as
Mhm.
I got involved, and by the way, as you can imagine, Libertarian in Chief, I obviously had one goal, right? I was going to run for president.
Mhm.
So, like, that's how I got involved in the Libertarian Party. And then it was like, no, and if you actually look back to the very first tweets that I did in that account, it was literally me running for president
Mhm.
after the Libertarians had already chosen their nominee. It
Mm.
was so dumb. You know what I mean? But all I did was I was taking things from the platform and then turning it into a tweet, and people
Mhm.
were loving it. They were loving it. And so when I finally kind of calmed down and got on the medication, I was like, all right, I'll keep the moniker. I'll just keep tweeting about politics, but I'll stop writing about it. I'll stop running for stuff, this and that. Like, the
Mhm.
kid has a disability. I got to deal with this. And so for 3 years, that's all I did, was just kind of build the following,
Mhm.
and make sure I didn't write and make sure I didn't run for anything and this and that.
Mhm.
And finally, when I moved to Oklahoma, Libertarian Party in Ohio, and I didn't really get along all that well. When I moved to Oklahoma, those guys kind of welcomed me with open arms, and that's when I finally got involved.
Mhm.
And that was pretty much why, is because people were like, now you got like 50,000 followers. Everyone's asking you about libertarians. You're one of the you know at least higher volume people talking about libertarianism all the time.
Mhm.
Why don't you actually do something about it? Instead of being some stupid talking head. And so that's when I finally got involved in Oklahoma libertarian politics. I
Mhm.
became the Tulsa regional chair, and then I became the Oklahoma
Mhm.
treasurer. And then at that point, people started asking me why I wasn't involved in a bigger stage, and I really had to think that through to make sure I wasn't going to trigger, the bipolar.
Mhm.
And then I finally became the national treasurer and things like that. And frankly, because of all the inside baseball and all that stuff, like, it did start triggering, and that's why I was like, yeah, we're only doing one run
Right.
of, you know what I
Right.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it. I was the chair here in Duval
Okay.
for, let's see, about 5 years,
Okay.
somewhere around there. But before that, I was just a regular officer,
Yeah.
because in 2017, I went to my first meeting, and there was, like, 20 people there, and I was like, "Oh, this seems really cool,"
Yeah.
and they seemed normal at the time.
Yeah. They tricked you.
I know,
They
right?
tricked
They got me.
you.
But, don't feel bad, libertarians. I'm
Yeah.
including myself in this whole
Yeah.
not normal. So, I'm not just picking on you unfairly. But, so I went to this meeting and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And they had a chair, and then he was also running for, I think, school board.
Okay.
And somebody said, "Hey, if you switch parties to the Republican Party, I'll be your donor," or something like that.
Yeah.
I'll give you tons of money or something. Something along that line. I don't know exactly. So he stepped down, I think, so that he could join the
Sure.
Republican Party. And then we didn't have a chair. And they were like, everybody's like, "Oh, should we?" They were like, they looked at me. It's like my third meeting, and they're like, "You want to be chair?" And I was like, I don't have any
That
clue
sounds
what a
about
chair
right.
does. And so, there wasn't even a ideas of grandiose ideas.
Right.
It was just like
Yeah.
I have no idea what it even does.
Right. Right.
And so then they dissolved,
Hmm.
and then after that, I kinda got irritated because I was like, "For real? I just show up
Yeah.
and y'all go down?" And
Yeah.
so then I reached out to a couple of the guys that I knew, and I said, "Let's figure this out and bring it back." And so
Yeah.
they came over to my house, and we spent, like, several weeks planning and, getting our
Sure.
bylaws and all this,
Yeah.
kind of figuring things out. And then we brought the affiliate back. We got reaffiliated with the state party. There was only 3 of us. At the time, I was like, "I don't wanna be chair because again, I
Right.
don't know what a chair does."
Yeah.
And so I was like, "I'll just be." So I bounced between treasurer and secretary of a local
Sure.
affiliate.
Yeah.
And it was funny because eventually I did go on to be chair.
Yeah.
And, I don't like, there's no humble way to say this, but I think I was one of the better chairs that the
Yeah.
party has had here locally
Hmm.
in a long time. I don't want to say I was the best. There might be somebody,
Sure.
kind of in the past, but I did a pretty good job, I think. And it was a whirlwind of fun. I
Yeah.
ended up being on the state party. People were asking me to go to the national party. I was like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't have the energy. And actually, my son is a large part of the reason
Yeah.
that I never went to national because I was like, I got a podcast, I got a
Yeah.
full-time job, I got a kid. I'm like,
Yeah.
at some point, this is just too much is too
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
So and what I do already is probably too much, but
Yeah.
I figure it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, it is. It's hard to get involved. It's hard to quantify how much time you spend on it, even at the local level, at the state level. You know
Mhm,
what I mean? It was hours a month, and there we justified it like, okay, I'll listen to the meeting while I do 4 hours of laundry. I'll listen to
mhm,
the bylaws while I do 4 hours of laundry and this kind of
mhm,
stuff. You know what I mean? I was able to handle it pretty good at the state level for several years. When I got to national, it was the same thing. It was a lot more meetings. Luckily, those tended to be later at night, so we
mhm.
worked those out okay. But what happened was the four quarterlies where you actually traveled someplace, like on top of my business travel, which has remained for every job that I've had,
Right.
since. That was pretty tough. It was like, okay, now I'm going to go for a weekend. You know what I mean? Like, not even during the week. I'm going to go for a weekend now on top of the travel I just did for the week and the travel I'm going to do for next week.
Mhm,
And then it became kind of a real sore spot in the family, and there wasn't a real good way to mitigate that. Like there are people that would miss every third or fourth travel because they needed time off or whatever. I didn't do that. I hit every one, and it just became a lot. It sounds dumb because it's 4 times a year, but you're also paying for it too. So
mhm.
then there's that added stress of like, not only am I leaving you with 4 kids on the weekend, but by the way, it's going to cost us $1,500. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
I'm gonna fly to some random place and stay in some hotel and eat, with everybody and blah blah blah. And it's $1,000, $1,500 later. You come home and she's just spent 96 hours with 4 sick kids,
Mhm.
and you had 2 meetings and you're complaining that it was a waste of time. That's not a great
Right,
combination.
right, right.
So,
It's so how do you manage family life with all of these things?
yeah.
Because presumably you still gotta go, throw the football with the kids,
Yep.
boys,
Mhm.
maybe take them fishing once in a while.
Yep. Mhm.
Um, does the high and I think I kind of asked this a little bit earlier,
Yeah.
but does the hypomania type attitude, like, do you have that in the family? Does the family have to try to keep up with you,
Yeah.
when
No.
you go to the amusement park or wherever?
Yeah, I don't think so. The hypomania will almost always kind of manifest itself in work. And so, what I do need to be careful of is taking on a bunch of things that I have to do during the day that
Mhm,
would then take away from the limited amount of time I have with the
mhm,
family. You know what I mean? So, there'll be plenty of times where Saturday he'll come up or one of them will come up and I'm typing away and they're like, "Are you working?" And I'm like, "Well, not really. I'm not getting paid for what I'm doing. You know what I mean? But it's a side project that I got going and that kind of thing." So I really did have to stick to the schedule. So really, I get home at 6:30. I just plan 6:30 to 9 or 9:30 is
mhm,
family. You know what I mean? And
mhm,
then I go from there and move on. So that's been how I've dealt with it. And then in addition, when we went to running my own business, we did that at a strategic time where then I had it was probably about 4 years after I got diagnosed, but then I spent 4 years running my own businesses where I did get to set my own schedule. You know what I mean?
right,
And that was a much bigger help. So we did, if it was nice out, I would come home
mhm,
early and we'd go fishing and do that kind of stuff. And it's actually been a harder struggle this last year than it was the first several years because now I'm back in corporate America and I don't quite have that flexibility. So we're
mhm,
back on the schedule thing, and it is a lot harder, especially with 4 of them. You always feel like you're not spending enough time with any one of them individually, but you always feel like you're spending, every waking minute you have with them as a group, and so it is tough. Sometimes you're just trying to think like, okay, when's the last time I sat down with George, and actually spent some time with him, and maybe you haven't in a month. You know what
yep,
I mean? but you also can't think of any minutes of the day that you had free to do anything more than what you did. You know what I mean? And so that is a tough part of it. So, but I've gotten through it all with scheduling, just really making sure that that 6:30 to 9:30 remains theirs. You know
Right.
what I mean? And if that gets compressed at all, I try and make it up on a different day where maybe I get home earlier than 6:30. You know what I mean? Or maybe I do force myself and take that day off when there's something going on that I know means a lot, and
Right.
I get to the school and stuff like that. So
Yeah. Don't,
yeah,
she's not here at the moment because we're a bit early, but, don't say scheduling too much.
yeah,
Um, so, my VA lady, helps out with the show.
yeah,
Now she normally would be in the chat,
yeah,
talking it up and whatnot, but, she was not aware because obviously we planned this way late,
sure, yeah,
like 11:30 at night, folks. We're messaging back and forth because Todd reached out and he was like, "Hey, man," he's like, "I got some openings." He was like, "You have any availability now?" I was like, "Well, not only do I have availability, I could actually use it tomorrow." And then we landed on why don't we at 11:30 at night, why don't we get up at 5:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, so we can have a 5:30 show. But she's always getting on to me about calendars. She's like, you need to
yeah,
start using your calendar because I'm notoriously terrible about calendars,
yeah,
emails. I hate that. I get in so much trouble all the time because I neglect those things because I'm busy doing other things.
sure,
Uh,
yeah,
you know, so it's funny, and my wife will always give me a hard time because I'm like, what are you doing today? And she's like, Your phone is in your hand. You literally can look at the calendar." So she lives by the calendar.
nice,
I try to live by anything other than a calendar. Just
yeah,
so, so it's kind of funny that you mentioned the scheduling because if I can manage myself, like I have one of two modes when
yeah,
it comes to calendar. It's either I don't use it
mhm,
very well at all, or I try to micromanage my entire day. I'm like, all right,
sure,
so from, 9 to 9:30, I'm gonna do this, and then at
yeah,
9:30, I'm gonna do this, and then, and I built it in so tight that it's almost inevitable that
yeah,
I'm gonna miss the mark,
sure,
and then one
yeah,
thing then eventually before the end of the day, probably halfway through the day, I'm, like, way off of the schedule.
yeah.
Now I'm stressed out about it. But if
Yeah, and
he's
I do. It's interesting. I got the two modes, so 8 to 6:30.
Mhm,
If you looked at my calendar, it'd be insane. It's like every half hour, boom, 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 boom.
mhm,
I usually am bouncing into a meeting and have no idea what the meeting is. Like I'll say, okay, is this my meeting or yours?
right,
And then that's how we start.
mhm,
And so every half hour throughout the week, I'm doing something different. But then what I do from a calendar perspective for the family is I just say I don't take meetings from 6:30 to 9:30.
gotcha,
And I don't take meetings on the weekends before or after 11 a.m. and before 9 p.m. So like I block off these large spots. Now I'd prefer that we have nothing planned during that time. I'd rather just be at home and dealing with whatever's
mhm,
coming at me. Um, but so I don't actually schedule a whole lot of family things during that time. I just kind of have it kind of family office hours. It's open, and that's those
gotcha,
3 hours we can do whatever comes up. And my wife will schedule stuff, but I tend to try and keep those times just completely open for whatever
mhm.
happens. So
Yeah. All right. So let me do something here, Todd.
yep,
We are going long today. Todd has graciously agreed to help a brother out with his stream hours that he needs. So we're doing an extra long show today. So somewhere around the 2 hour range. And very much appreciate it. Since we're going long, I normally, when I have guests on, I don't do my intermission, but let me do an intermission. It'll be just
sure,
a few minutes.
yeah,
I have two videos lined up. I like to promote stuff and then also, a video of my own just to let people know, a little bit more about the show. So, Todd, I'm going to put you backstage for just a moment.
yep,
Then we're going to go to, intermission. I call it intermission, commercial, whatever you want to call it. And then we'll be back and we'll continue talking about, bipolar and family and how you manage. And then, maybe even talk a little bit more about your book and whatever else. So we'll
sure,
be right back, sir. And you might want to put yourself on mute
I
just
will.
so you don't have a hot mic out there and be like, man,
Yep,
that damn Liberty dad, he sucked. No, just kidding.
sounds good.
All righty, sir. So we'll be back in just a moment. All
Yep,
right,
thank you.
folks. We're going to go to intermission. So we'll be back and see you in just a few moments.
Let us make man. This is the scripture where God was talking about creating the human. And when he talked about creating the human, he said, let us make man. And for me, the us in let us make man entails and implies to me that I should be assisting God with making men. And this is where the X for Boys comes into play. This is the new man making machine in Albany, Georgia. We started the X for Boys program in January of 2019. Albany, Georgia is one of the poorest cities in the nation, and also Albany, Georgia has one of the highest crime rates in the nation. And so I took it upon myself to curb that by working with young men and boys in the community and teaching them how to work in the skilled trades, such as working on cars, fixing houses, simple home improvement, simple brake repair, oil changes, plumbing, anything of that nature, to try and help boys actually use their hands.
I appreciate King Randall for taking the time out of his life to give us young men the opportunity to do things that can help us be better men and better people in life.
The X for Boys is creating men that'll be self-sufficient, that will be able to protect their women and children, and will be able to go out and earn things for themselves. We do not teach victimhood. There is nobody holding us down. I am teaching the boys that they can go out and get whatever it is that they want when they want it to. They have the same Father as Jesus, and that is God. And so they are able to go and do whatever they want to. The scripture says, greater is the God that is in me than the God that's in the world. So it's up to us to teach them about the God that's in themselves and to create everything that they want. Let us make man. Follow us on social media at New Emerging King, and you can go to the xforboys.org for our website.
Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show.
All right, so we're back, and like as you just heard, whatever works best for dads, and in this particular case, what worked best for these two dads was to, hey, let's get up bright and early, and not even bright; it's still dark out, or it was dark out, and let's have a show, and let's have even a longer show, because sometimes that's what dads do. So I have with me today, I have Todd Hagopian. He has graciously joined me very early to help me out with my Rumble streaming, which I got a little behind on. That Liberty lady, whenever she wakes up and she gets in the chat, she'll be like, I told you to hit it hard at the beginning of the month, and you didn't listen to me. So, and that's why I shouldn't. Make sure you check out her services as well. My VA lady, she does a lot of work for this show. So if you're thinking about podcasting, or if you have a podcast yourself, check her out. She does a lot of great work, and then she's not in the chat to give up all her links, but follow the show, you'll find her. Anyway, let's get back to Todd. Todd, there you are, sir. We're back. We're talking with Todd. He's talking about all kind of things related to fatherhood, 4 boys, bipolar, big businessman. All right, we were talking about, and then politics as well, right? Because why not? So I met you through politics.
Yeah.
And uh, what we were talking about before the break is not so much politics, but like how you manage all this and how you manage your family time. And you were saying like, hey, I block out certain areas, and I'm like, I just don't take work,
Right.
because if work comes my way, work takes priority.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what ends up happening. You dive in, you focus on work. So, how does your family have any things that they adapt to, or do they like, hey, Dad, it's, you're doing that thing again, or
Yeah.
whatever. Is there anything like that, that you're willing to divulge?
Yeah, for sure. My wife watches me, right? Like I have her watching me on purpose to make sure I'm not spinning out and spiraling and stuff like that. But she's very used to me essentially working whenever I'm not, doing something. So,
Mhm.
so for example, like I mean, we might have a weekend where we just try and watch movies all weekend and kind of let the kids come as they will, and do what we have to. If that's the case, I'm likely going to have my laptop on. I'm likely going to be writing, doing something to do that
Mhm.
the entire time. Like there will be days where it's like, she likes the films that have the subtitles and whatnot. There
Mhm.
will be full days where I'm like, yeah, no, like, like we're gonna be watching movies, but I'm gonna be working, for the
Right.
9 hours while we do it, so I need to not be reading the screen because I'm gonna be
Mhm.
focused on this one. So that happens. That happens quite often, and so they're used to me doing, and that's why my sons will come up and be like, "Are you working?" Because I'll be typing
Mhm.
60 words a minute pretty much all day long, and they need to know if they can bust in or not. You know what I mean? So everyone's used to asking that question, but typically the answer on the weekend will be like, yes, but I
Right.
can put it down. Like this is my own stuff that I'm doing on the
Right.
side, like, or I don't have a deadline anytime, until Monday. So I'm just getting it done. So it's not. I would say it's not great. It's not like I don't work on the weekend. I work pretty much all weekend. I
Mhm.
just don't have deadlines and set times and
Mhm.
things where I've got to carve out, 2 hours. And it's like when you and I are talking about when we can get together. That's why my answer to you is always like before 7 or after 10,
Mhm.
because I kind of keep those. Those are the times when I can do stuff. So I'm pretty good about setting the boundaries, but I'm not good about like if there's nothing going on and I don't have to take the kids anywhere and we don't have a board game planned or whatever. I'm probably pulling out my laptop
Mhm.
and working on stuff because I for 15 years I work 21 hours a day. You know what I mean? I'm just used to doing
Right.
that and still having fun and still being able to talk to my wife and still watch a movie and stuff like that. So
Gotcha. It's
yeah,
interesting. I don't necessarily work crazy hours, but I just don't stop working,
right.
like, in
Yeah.
general. And
Yeah.
it's not always because people are like, "Man, how do you do all this stuff?" You know? And I'm not trying to brag and be like, "Oh, I'm one of those 100-hour work a week guy." Like, I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying, like, I'm constantly busy.
Yeah.
And it sounds kinda like you have that similar
Yeah.
mentality where you're just like, "Okay, there's an open opportunity, there must be something for me to do,"
Yeah.
because I'm my Achilles heel, if you will be doing many things, so I have to work really,
Yeah.
really hard to not add more to my plate. So it's
Yeah.
not so much that I'm trying to do one thing and just dive into it for,
Yeah.
10 hours. Like, I do my podcast, and then I immediately go to work, and
Yeah.
then, we have our son, so I have to do, maybe take him somewhere, go pick him up, whatever, those
Yeah.
kind of things. My wife's in real estate,
Mhm.
and that's all she does. Like,
Yeah.
she's like a normal person. She does, like, one thing.
Yeah.
Me, I'm like, I'll do, like, 12.
Yeah.
And so I when she buys a house, sometimes I will go and help renovate it, and I've got, like, pictures and videos that I put out
Sure.
on social media of doing that, and so I'll do that on the weekend, then I'll come back and I'll, prepare for my podcast.
Yeah.
I'll, be researching, doing kinda stuff, or my son, I'll hang out with him,
Yeah.
or I will, like, we'll go work in my yard or go work in
Right.
my garage for,
Yeah.
maybe I'm working on a woodworking project or something like that. So I'm just constantly
Mhm.
like, I don't
Yeah.
I don't even think I know what it means to slow down anymore.
Sure.
Which
Yeah.
is weird because, Todd, we're getting older,
I know.
and we're supposed to slow down, I think.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm actually ramping up more as I get older. I'm like, "Oh, I went around the sun again?
Right.
I could do
Yeah.
something else this year."
I know. Yeah, I get into the same mode. People ask like, how many hours a week do you work? And I say 50 because that's how many hours I've got kind of
Mhm,
scheduled. You know what I mean?
mhm,
10 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's kind of what I schedule. And then everything else, I'm probably doing 70 if you count all the time I'm doing something that I feel
mhm,
like doing. But at that time, it's something I feel like doing. And what I've gotten good at with these side projects is making sure that I don't give myself real hard deadlines,
mhm,
which was a little harder in politics because there's people counting on you to get stuff done. You know what
mhm,
I mean? But even then, I was better at saying I'm not going to take that committee. I'm not going to do this. You know what I mean?
mhm,
Like I tried to keep it where I had time to get the stuff done as long, and I had flexibility on when to do it as long as I got it done by the
mhm,
end. So even with the books, like it was like I wrote the book before I got into deciding I was going to publish it. That way, there was never anybody saying, "Hey, you got to write 20 more pages. You got to get this thing done." It was more
Okay.
like you got to edit, you got to put stuff together to market it, like this and that. I can do all that stuff kind of on my own time. You know what I mean? So side projects, I've gotten much better than I used to be at just not signing myself up for a time bound commitment. And it's more like, okay, I'm going to launch a website when the stuff is done rather than I'm going to launch a website on July 15th. So now I got to get a bunch of stuff done. So,
Okay. Gotcha. And by
yeah.
the way, speaking of your book, people, if you haven't heard about it, and I'll put it back up on the screen here for you guys. So, because we talked about it a little bit earlier, but make sure that we get a good little promo in here for Todd. So he wrote this book called, I'm trying to navigate to it.
Yeah.
Wrote this book called The Hypomanic Toolbox. Here it is up on the screen. Sorry about that. You can go to hypomanictoolbox.com. You can go check that out. Now, is that the only way to purchase the book is through that website, or can they
Yeah,
also
actually, it's not
Amazon?
even up for purchase yet. So it'll
Oh,
be
not yet.
pre-order in October, and then
Okay.
it'll actually be launching in January. So we got plenty of time, plenty
Okay.
of time. And I will be at some point here in the next 2 months transitioning everything to toddhagopian.com. That hypomatictoolbox.com will stay active.
Mhm.
But I am going to build the author platform on toddhagopian.com again once I get that spun back up. But in true hypomanic, I'm basically building out $50,000 of content,
Mhm.
just business transformation content, and then I'm going to transfer that over to toddhagopian.com, and there will be all kinds of tools, all kinds of deep dives that you can do on the system that I talked about, and that's where everything will be housed. And then the book will launch here at the
Mhm.
beginning of next year, and then every 6 months I'll have a book coming out after that for a period of time. So.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. Now I'm slightly disappointed that I have to wait until January to read the book, but that's okay. I'll put it in the hold on, make sure that she's not in the chat. I'll put it in the calendar.
Yeah, and
Reminder.
I should say I am looking for book reviewers, and they do get early copies. It's just
Mhm.
not a hardcover, so anybody who does want that can reach out to me. I haven't been overly strict on who gets it. Like if you want to read it and you want to give me some kind of review or not, I don't care. I'll send it
Sure.
out to people. One of the things I've learned in the book world is a lot of authors try and keep their thing quiet until it launches because they don't want people to know. And in reality, nobody cares. Like, so people just want to hear you talk or read something you wrote, and that's actually how you're going to sell more books. So
Mhm.
I give my content out pretty regularly to people who are just interested, and if they end up writing me a review that I can use later, great. If
Mhm.
not, it's really no skin off my back. So
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. No, I will definitely read it. You don't necessarily have to give me a promo or anything.
yeah,
That's fine. I can,
yeah,
help you out. Read it, and maybe, maybe I'll even, bring you back on, and we'll discuss it more,
yeah, perfect.
specifically, and and talk about some of the highlights,
Yep,
that I learned from the book. So that would be kind of fun. Now I have to be careful in making that promise because
yeah, no,
I
that's
get
fine.
so busy.
Yeah,
People will ask me, they'll say like, "Oh, do you watch this podcast? Do you check out that podcast?" And I'm like, I would love to, but I don't have time to do anything for leisure anymore. Like it's all now work. Like
yeah,
I think I told my audience the other day, I actually was doing research on this idea that I had, and part of that research was watching a movie. So
right,
I watched a movie for research, like it would have otherwise been a leisure movie. But I
right,
watched it. The reason I watched it was like, I got this idea. I've
yeah,
seen it before, but I want to go and watch it again to see if I remember the details correctly.
yeah,
If this will fit this idea that I'm working on. So I'm just
sure,
constantly working on stuff. So I don't get to do much leisure. I mean, sometimes I do. Like I took my
right.
son to the movies,
Mhm.
and we watched Minecraft. Uh,
Yeah,
he loved it.
yeah,
It was he just was so excited to watch this
yeah,
movie.
they love
We
it.
left, and he's like, "I could go watch that again," and I was
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Okay, like that's very
Yeah,
interesting." So
yeah. When you have four, you wait until they come out and then you buy it on streaming
right,
because
right.
it's probably a $75 endeavor to go to
Yeah,
the
no, I could imagine. That'd be tough, it's like all those tickets and all
yeah,
that popcorn, all the the soda and whatnot, candy and whatever else. So that could be wild. So okay, so we've kind of talked about all these things. Tell me if you will, some of the challenges that you've had to face other than just like, hey, I've been drinking too much?
Yeah.
Other challenges in business that you've had that, like, hey, my ideas are so crazy that I find it difficult sometimes to get other people on board, or, those kind of, challenges that you might have faced.
Yeah, and interestingly, that's kind of what sparked the whole book idea because that's where I ran into stagnation, right? So
Mhm.
depending on which business I took over at the time, I would run into a variety of these different stagnation symptoms where it's like, okay, maybe they have a product that they're making so much money on they can't see that they have to walk away from it if they're going to take it to the next level, because if they keep milking that cow, you know what I mean, they're going to they'll be fine for 3 more years, but then by the time they're not fine, they're going to be way behind.
Mhm.
Or I'll see that they've lost too much talent and they've replaced with
Mhm.
sub talent, and they're just not going to get out of this spiral. And so there's all these stagnation symptoms that started to become apparent that I needed to crush once I got into a business. And so the bottom line is, yeah, anytime you come in and change stuff dramatically, which is usually my fashion, you do run into a lot of things. So I mean, we had one business in Whirlpool. We were losing $180 million a year. Every day you walk into work, you lose $500,000. Like, we had to break everything. You know what I mean? That was a dramatic, like, everything you had to break and then rebuild to get that business back to even. And then the other businesses have been more in the 50 to $100 million range. But even those, like, you're taking over a business that used to be a small company, a small family company, and you're trying to turn it into, a fast growing business. And people have been there for 30 years. They've always done the same thing. They've always had the same owner. Like, everything you do is going to be a challenge. And so what you do is you try to frame everything as not as dramatic as what you're actually doing
Mhm.
in the background. You know what I mean? So, like, a dumb example would be, there's the company, when I bought my own company, like, we had to increase pricing. Like,
Mhm.
we were not charging enough. We had to increase pricing. It was one of the only ways that we were going to make it out of what we needed to. And it was right in the middle of COVID. And obviously all the employees are like, you can't increase pricing. Customers will go crazy, blah, blah, blah. Like, they were the front line, right? They were going to have to deal with the price increases.
Mhm.
So what I ended up doing is I made a calculator that they would use to quote, right? And
Mhm.
I managed the background. So I could change prices 4 days a week. They would never know. It's just the calculator outputted something
Mhm.
different. So they never had to have the pricing conversation
Mhm.
with the customer. They would just send the quote. And if the customer had a problem, I'd tell them to have them call me. You know what I mean? And so you find ways to make the dramatic challenge
Mhm.
not quite as impactful on the people that are dealing with the front line of the challenge,
Mhm.
or you find a way to alter their goals so that they're getting paid based on the challenge rather than the metric that they used to get paid on. Because you'll find a lot of, like, well, we can't do that, our on-time delivery will go down, or we can't do that, our percentage of this will go down. And you're like, yeah, but that percentage doesn't make us any money.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And they don't care about making money because they don't make more money if you make more money,
Mhm.
typically, unless you got a cool bonus structure in place. What they care about is not getting in trouble. And for
Right.
years, they've gotten in trouble if XYZ happened.
Mhm.
So you have to change it so that they don't get in trouble when that happens, or that they get rewarded if they hit the new metric. You know what I mean? So a lot of stagnation symptoms can be just framed differently so that they're getting rewarded in a different way, or at least
Right.
don't get in trouble for the things that they used to, or have permission to say no or yes but. And we use this yes but terminology all the time. Like, yes, you can have that in 2 months instead of 3, but it's going to cost you more.
Mhm.
Or yes, you can have that feature, but it's going to be a longer lead time. And those are things that people aren't used to being able to do the yes but. And once they learn it, it becomes really easy and really obvious.
Mhm.
They're asking for more, so they're either going to pay more or they're going to wait longer. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
it just makes sense as a business person, right? But you have to get that it's a whole evolution of the way people think. And so those
Gotcha.
are the biggest challenges I've run into. But after 4 transformations, I've kind of learned how
Mhm.
to deal with each of those, and that's how the books ended up coming about.
Gotcha. Do you, from your perspective or your observation, is it when you're dealing with new ideas and they're like a really big
Yeah.
idea with big changes, do you find that for you, it just seems like a normal idea, whereas to others, it might seem like, the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
Really?
I think that the best way to answer that is I know they're big ideas, but
Mhm,
to me, I know they can get done.
mhm,
You know what I mean? Whereas other people will look at it and be like, that's a big idea and impossible to do. You
mhm,
know what I mean? So like in one company recently, the lead times in the industry are 12 to 14 months.
mhm,
And so I sat in front of 150 people and I said, we're going to change our lead time to 6 months.
mhm,
And everyone's like, Jesus Christ, this portion of the product costs, it takes 6 months to get this thing. How are we going to deliver the whole thing in 6 months? And I said, well, we're going to buy more of that thing,
mhm,
right? Like these are the 5 steps we're going to do to get down to 6 months. So by the time I rolled it out to the team, it was, these are the 5 things we have to do.
mhm,
And those are all reasonable. Each of those 5 things, different people are going to have to do. So, like, every single person's going to be involved from going to 14 to 6. You know
mhm,
what I mean? But the 6 month is actually not going to be hard because if none of these 5 things are hard, then the 6 months won't be. You know what I mean? And even then, it was probably 3, 4, or 5 months in until people really got it because they saw the lead time starting to drop,
mhm,
this much. And the thing I said that would save 3 months actually saved 3.5 months and this and that. And we started going down from 14 and we're getting towards the 6. And
mhm,
and so it's a little bit of a dichotomy, right? Like you say, set these grandiose goals and then you have to break those grandiose goals back into smaller things. But
mhm,
I also talk a lot against incrementalism, both in politics and in business. Like, I don't like incrementalism.
mhm,
So it's not about getting incrementally better, but it is about breaking up big goals into things that people can believe can be achieved while keeping their head on the big goal, because that's how you really drive
mhm,
huge results. Everybody has to know that the stuff they're doing today is going to help you get this major goal that's
mhm,
going to increase revenue by X. You know what I mean? When you have a industry that's at 14-month lead time and you go to 6, what ends up happening is you double your revenue
mhm,
because you no longer have competition. You put this in front of somebody and you're the only one that can deliver in 6 months, so you win 100% of the time instead of 27% of the time. You
mhm,
know what I mean? So all of a sudden your revenue changes dramatically. What happens when your revenue changes dramatically? The person who worked so hard to get you down to 6 months now has to work twice as hard because they have twice as much stuff to do. You know what I mean? Like,
mhm,
so you have to as you put these big goals in, like I had to build the engine so that we would also be able to handle the influx of revenue
mhm,
without everybody just getting flooded
mhm,
with work. And that's another hard thing because they can see that too. They can be like, so you're saying we're going to double revenue, so we're going to work really hard for 6 months to get this done, and then we're going to have to work really hard for the rest of our lives, to double, so
right,
that you can get promoted, that kind of thing. So
mhm,
you do have to think about the big picture and then break it into bite-sized pieces so that they know that the little thing that they're going to do for the next 2 months helps get to the big picture, but you don't want to lose track of that because part of the whole philosophy is that they need to know they're part of something big. You
mhm,
know, they have to always have that. So every month at the town halls, we're talking about the big picture goals, and then we dive into these are the small things we have to get done in the next month to
mhm.
keep these big picture goals on track.
Gotcha. That's an interesting, that's kind of interesting answer because I remember reading what was it? The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. And I know
Mhm.
we're not, like
Yeah, yeah,
people like to look at him and be like, "Oh, he's not a good businessman," all this.
yeah,
Well, whether you like him or not, whether you think he was, fair or a good businessman, he seems to have become a billionaire one way or
yeah,
another. So,
yeah.
uh, presumably there's some lessons there.
Right.
But he was telling this story where like they had this project coming up and I guess people were tired. They were working late one night
Yeah.
and everybody's like exhausted. They're ready to go home, but they
Mhm.
they still got to crunch out some stuff.
Yeah.
And so I guess what he started doing was kind of in that same way, he started talking about, okay, here's the vision, here's the goal, kind of reminding people,
Mhm.
in a sense, kind of cheerleading the team
Yeah.
in a
Mhm.
way so that they could get back to that vigor so that they could complete the task at
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
And I think it's good that you point this out, because as somebody who's in business,
Yeah.
who either runs a business or consults with businesses, I think a lot of people, what they don't realize is are these kind of things that management has to do. It's like not just dictating and telling everybody, go do this, it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
But even planning in, that idea, okay, how do I communicate this to people?
Yeah.
How do I get my team to be as excited as I am, or at least excited enough to be able
Right.
to meet these crazy challenges, because we've
Right.
got some big ones ahead of us,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel
Yeah.
like this was like a really instructive part of the conversation, because most people don't hear that from
Yeah.
business leaders. They just think, "Oh, you just start telling, do this and do
Yeah.
that and do more of it and work harder."
Yeah.
It's kind of like, what the impression people get.
Yeah.
So, can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and you'll often like some of my most controversial, social media moments is when I talk about how CEOs are underpaid, and the
Mhm.
reason is because they are doing all these things that people
Mhm.
don't understand, and there is only a subset of business leaders who know how to do it the right way. There's some bad CEOs for sure, a lot of bad CEOs, but there's only some people that know how to do it the right way, and this is one of the things that I bring up when people go, well, he makes 50 times what an employee makes. I'm like, if you put 50 employees in his job, it wouldn't get done.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And the
Right.
reason is because there's these things like they have to set these major goals, then they have to break it down and figure out how to hit those goals. And so, like, we implement a raise your hand rule. And essentially, what it is like every month at the town hall, I'll go through here's our 3 1 year goals, here's our 3 3 year goals, and here's our 3 5 year goals. And if you're ever working on something that doesn't match up to one of these 9 goals, raise your hand and make your manager tell you why you're not. You know what I mean? Or how it does, or how long it'll last that you have to go through this short term pain. Because there's always going to be times where we have to do something that doesn't line up directly with those goals. But
Mhm.
for the most part, it's make your manager explain how it links up to a goal. Because most
Right.
of the time, my managers are also trained to like use 100% of your employee hours to go after these 9 goals, because people are more willing to work hard if
Mhm.
they realize that the thing they're doing is driving one of these
Right.
long-term goals. And so these big goals, like, hey, we're going to get to 6 month lead time, like anybody can make that goal. Anybody
Mhm.
knows that 6 month lead time is better than 14-month lead time. But
Mhm.
if you don't break it down and you don't make it so like this is what each group in the company is going to do in order to hit that goal, this is how the managers need to communicate it, this is how the employees are going to need to react, this is how it's going to affect the employees if we hit the goal. So then we have to make sure we're hiring in this group in order to, or have this outsource ready, you know what I mean, in order to accomplish it. Like, a lot goes in. I might have hatched that goal, let's say August of last year. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And it was months and months before it got put in front of people. You know what I mean? Like, it was put together the right way so that everything was packaged right. And so there's a lot that goes into setting grandiose goals. It's not just throw the hat over the wall and figure out how to get over it.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's probably, I'm gonna probably cut that up and
Mhm.
just kind of have that clip on standby. So when
Yeah,
people start talking, because you're right, people will say, they'll go, "Oh, CEOs, they make three." I think the number now is 300. Like
yeah,
they're
yeah.
like,
I
"Oh,
don't quite make 300, so I use 50, but
they'll be
it's
like,
like,
they make 300 times." They usually pick out some billionaire like Jeff Bezos or something like
yeah,
that. They're like, "Oh, he makes $300 million. I'm sorry, 300 times what his lowliest employee makes." Blah blah blah.
yeah,
And I'm like, he also is responsible for making sure that that employee, along with many, many
yeah.
others, actually has a job.
Right. Yeah.
So, where in what I try to tell people, like, let's say I'm a CEO of a business, and let's say there's 5,000 employees that are underneath me altogether, right? Well, my decisions can affect 5,000 people.
Right.
Whereas in most cases, with limited, for the most part, any one of those 5,000 employees is not affecting 5,000 employees.
Right.
You
Right.
might have, depending on the leadership chain,
Yeah.
and some others, where people are affecting, many thousands of people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, the CEO is responsible for all
Yeah.
5,000 of them.
Yeah.
And like you just described, sometimes that vision has to be communicated so that people have the wherewithal
Yeah.
to be able to do their job. Because everybody knows, like, if you just like, some people do like to go in and just do a job, and they're just like,
Yep.
they're punching a clock.
Yep.
They go in, they work on the factory line. They don't really care too much. They're just like, hey, I'm putting in my hours, doing my time, and that's
Yep.
cool. Nothing wrong with that. But a lot of people actually want to have, what is the value of my work?
Yep.
What is it doing? And so somebody has to be able to communicate that and say, here is the value of your work. You're not
Yep.
just some monkey, moving gears around.
Yep.
You have a particular value that you provide. And so I think that was I really enjoyed
Yep.
hearing that.
Yep.
What other kind of okay, so I know we're getting close to our time,
Yep.
and we don't have to do the whole 2 hours.
Sure.
What else have we not discussed that's important to you as a dad? Whatever it is, whatever topic, politics, kids, family, wife,
Yeah.
how many times you gotta go out on date night, whatever.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's not a good topic. So with the 4 kids, like we're just now getting to the age where we can do that. So
Mm,
it's been years and years. So that's certainly important, and you got to find ways to do it. But we are not good at that, so that's not a great topic for us. Like we're finally getting back into it, and
sure.
we've moved so many times for work that we have
Mhm,
nobody around us. You know what I mean?
mm,
Like I would say, building in those support systems are so important because of things like that, where you like we just don't have people where we can be like, hey, let's have somebody watch the kids for a day. Like
mhm,
if you ask me who that would be, there is nobody. Like
mhm,
we have been such a close knit, especially with the COVID and all that stuff. Like
mhm,
it just turned into a self sufficient family, And so the one thing that I think has been hardest is letting your kids be who they're going to be. You know what I mean? Like I was a hardcore wrestler for a long, long time. Like
mhm,
all I did when I was a kid was sports.
mhm,
Period. Like that's all I did. Um, and so having a few of my kids who are just not into it, like that's been interesting, right? And
mhm,
so I've tried to make myself not push it on them, and
mhm,
this and that. You want to be a coder, great. You want to be a YouTube, designer, whatever. Like let's figure that part out. You want to be a writer, great. Those kinds of things. Like I didn't get into writing until way later, but one of them likes it. So okay. I have a kid who hasn't learned to ride a bike yet, and it's okay. That's not what you want to do. That's fine.
mhm.
Like I haven't rode a bike in 30 years, so it's not something you need to know how to do for the rest of your life. Like,
Right.
so, but letting some of those things be okay,
Mhm,
is a really hard part of being a dad, where it's like, okay. And then also just frankly, not putting in the time, and knowing that you might be judged, right? Like my kid hasn't learned to ride a bike. Does that make me a bad dad? Well, he's done all these other things. You know what I mean?
mhm,
Like I
right.
don't know. My kid didn't learn to swim until later in life. Why? Because we just didn't know. Like we were new parents. Like
Mhm,
at what age do you do that? And all of a sudden it was later than it should have been. You know
right.
what I mean? So then you're playing catch up. So letting, and then obviously as you have more kids, they're all so different
Mhm,
that you do have to treat them differently because they
mhm,
like different things, and then you have
right.
to make sure you know the one boy likes wrestling, right? So let me make sure I'm not spending 30 of my 40 free hours working with him just because he likes what I like.
Mhm, mhm, right.
That's really hard stuff to do when you're a parent. So it's like let them be their own person, and then also give yourself a break. That
Mhm,
you're not hitting every metric that you might have set out when you were a dad. Like we're gonna play every sport, and we're gonna spend 3 hours every weekend playing catch, and this, and none of that stuff's
right.
gonna happen. You know
Got
what I mean? So you let it happen, but make sure that you're putting the appropriate amount of time into it so that they're going to remember the time that you put in. And
Right.
listen to your kids because they'll tell you. It'll be like, yeah, we haven't played board games in 3 weeks. You
Mhm,
know what I mean? Like they know that stuff. They're going to remember that stuff.
mhm,
Like listen to what they're saying, and then try to figure out what's important to them because they can't always articulate that. And so that's something I've gotten better at, but obviously still have a lot of work to do. Like it'll
mhm,
be like, man, I miss swim lessons. Okay, well you haven't mentioned that in 8 months. You know what I mean? Do you want to
mhm,
do swim lessons? And do you like it better than X, Y, and Z that we're doing now? Because you're going to have to give up a amount of time to do that, and that's really good conversation. Like, no, I really like doing that better. And this and that.
mhm,
So I don't know how to answer that in a short way, but those are things that I think surprised me as a dad. It was like I'm going to be super dad because I'm a super business person, so I'm just going to be able to do all this stuff, and really none of that stuff happens. And that's
Right.
okay. You know,
I gotcha.
and no matter, when I had one kid, I felt bad about how much time I'm spending with them. When I have four kids, I feel bad on how much time I'm spending with individually. Like, you're never going to spend enough time that you feel like you're doing it right. You
Mhm.
know, you need to listen to them and try to take action on it,
Mhm.
so that whatever they are seeing as important, you're spending enough time
Mhm.
doing. You know what I mean? And that's not easy. It's just not an easy thing. You're no matter what, you're going to feel like you're not doing enough, because you probably aren't. You know what I mean? Like, all of us could work 10 hours less and do 10 hours more. You know,
Mhm.
and so that's the other part that makes you feel guilty. But you just gotta either change it or get over it, and use the
Right.
time that you have as best as possible. And that's where my head is that's why I block off the time. So it's like, okay, I
Mhm.
know I've got this 30 hours a week I'm devoting to the kids and family,
Mhm.
and let's just make sure I do as much in that 30 hours as I can to make it so that 30 years from now they're not talking to a therapist. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
You know, so you work really hard, you have multiple businesses, you make good money, you have 4 boys, you have what it sounded like a stay-at-home wife,
yeah.
right? You are the trad life.
Yeah, pretty much.
The so-called internet, the life that everybody talks about. The only
Yeah.
thing I haven't heard is how you have a garden as well, right?
We do have a garden.
Oh,
Yeah.
see, there it is, there it is.
No,
So
I don't touch it. I don't know how to do it.
that's
I
fair.
don't even know how to
Well,
pick the
that's
food.
part of the trad life, right?
Yeah.
That the wife stays home, she
Yeah.
takes care of the family, she is basically the CEO of the
Yeah.
family, right?
Yeah.
She makes sure that the dinners are cooked, manages
Yeah.
the garden, keeps the house in order, keeps the
Yeah.
children in order, so on and so forth. So you are literally like, I need to send all the incels to you and say, "Look, if this short guy, because you're on the shorter side
Yeah.
like me, if this short guy can do it and he's got glasses like
Yeah.
me, you can do it. There's no excuse. He's got himself a wife, he's got himself 4 kids. He is Chad. So
Yeah.
now you're not Todd anymore, you're
Right.
Chad. So
Now, now, what I would tell them is the trick to all of that is, you better not be like 1% incel, because it'll never work. Like, you
right,
have to
right.
realize that she is doing everything, that she's working as hard as you, and
Yes, yeah.
you've got to act like that, and you've got to know that when you get home from work, it doesn't matter that you just worked 10 hours. She did also, and if she
Mhm.
wants you to do the next 3 hours, and she's not going to do anything, like, that is what it is. Like, there
Right.
is no other option other than you working a lot less and taking some stuff off of her plate. You know what I mean? And if she wants to build a garden and it's going to take 40 hours to do, and that means 40 hours less of housework is going to get done, then
Mhm.
you deal with it.
Right.
Like, you need to come up and bridge the gap. And so that's what I would tell people, the people that always talk about that lifestyle and whatnot. They talk about it um, like it's great, and then I come home and everything's done for me. You know what I mean? No,
Right.
that's not exactly or at
The
all
black
how
and
it
white
works.
stereotype where you walk in with your briefcase, you put it
Yeah.
down, you go, "Honey, I'm home." She comes in
Yeah.
and says, "Dinner's on the table."
Yeah,
And
I
you
will.
yeah,
I'll come
right.
home at 6:30, and I'll spend a half hour making food for the kids, and I'll spend
Mhm.
another half hour changing diapers. I'll do this and I'll do that, and and deal with the son who needs help and this and that. And at 7:45, I'm sitting down, going, "Man, I haven't had dinner yet." You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So, like, it is not walk in, have your food made for you, have the kids taken care of until it's not Mad Men. You know what I mean?
Right.
Where you just never have to do anything once you get home. It's the exact opposite of that if you want it all to
Right.
work.
Yeah, and just to put it in perspective for people, let's say that you went and you worked a 10-hour day at work, and then your wife worked a 10-hour day at the house, right? You come home, you are no longer in the work element. Now, you might have your
Exactly.
mind in the work, space, but you are no longer physically in the work element.
Yeah.
However, your wife
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
'Cause if she works at home, then
Yeah.
she is at work all day,
Yeah.
every day, and it would
100%.
be the equivalent would be if you were working in the office and then
Yeah.
your wife, quote, unquote, "came home,"
Right.
and she's like, "Look, I finished my day, why can't you finish your
Yeah.
day?" Right? Like, or, "Why isn't all this
Yeah.
stuff done?" Or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever the opposite of that attitude
Yeah.
is. So I think a lot of people misinterpret and they fail to
Yeah.
realize that, yeah, the man may be coming home, but the wife is still at work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's totally 100% true, and something that people don't think about. So, like, especially during the week, I assume that my job is to come home, and basically take everything off of her for a period of time.
Mhm.
You know, on the weekend, we both kind of buckle up
Mhm.
and dive into home and family. But like during the week, you're exactly right. Like she's already got 10 hours in, and you need to take it off of her for a little
Yeah,
bit. And that's a
absolutely.
really important point because yeah, for a long time, as we were having kids and growing in, that was the argument was always, I just worked 10 hours, now I got to do 2 more hours
Mhm.
here while you relax or something like that. And you're exactly right. You brought up the reason that it's not the same thing. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so it's just like I hate taking a phone call at 7 o'clock
Mhm.
that lasts 90 minutes for work. You know what I mean? Because something's
Right.
going wrong. I hate that. It would be the same thing as her having to do 90 more minutes,
Mhm.
after she thought you were coming home to help her out.
Right. And just between us as men, I look at it and I say, I am the leader of this house. So therefore, the responsibility to do the extra work, to go the extra mile falls on my shoulders.
Yeah. Mhm.
And like I just did that the other day. It was a small gesture, but I think it meant a lot. My wife happened to have a busy schedule the other day.
Yeah.
Let's see, what was it? Thursday? Yeah, it was Thursday. She had a busy schedule, and she texted me and she was like, "Man, I did this and this and this." She was like, "I'm super mom today." She was like, and then she just kind of like, "I should get a reward or something like that." And so I was like, it sounds like you need? It sounds like you need a rack of lamb for
Yeah.
dinner because that's one of her favorite meals. She loves
Right.
rack lamb, and I do a great job of cooking it. And so then I texted back a few minutes later. I was like, "Well, your mom's already made dinner, so and the store that we normally go to doesn't have it, so tomorrow night, but for sure
Yeah.
tomorrow night." So then the next night, I made sure to go and find it from a different store,
Sure.
and I had that all cooked up, and she had a succulent rack of lamb, as her quote unquote reward for being a
Sure.
super mom the day prior. And
Right.
and these are the kind of things that
Yep.
we as men need to do for our wives. Now, my wife is not a stay-at-home mom. I
Right.
mean, we're both
Yeah.
kind of stay at home in a sense because we
Sure.
work from
Yeah.
home, but she is actually, a hard charging real estate agent and investor.
Yeah.
So she has her own, full on days of
Sure.
work where
Yeah.
she comes home and she's exhausted as well. So,
Yeah.
but I look at it, I'm like, look, my job, I will go out of my way
Yep.
to do whatever I can because, for all you guys out there that want that trad life, if you
Mhm.
will, or you want to have the more stereotypical man, does
Yep.
business, have the wife at home, whatever. Well, then you got to deliver,
Yep.
even in the home, not just at work.
Yep.
So,
You're exactly
um,
right. Yeah. We
yeah, it
had one
looks
the
like,
other day where it was like, sorry, just real quick. We had one the other day where it was like, I was getting mad that the laundry wasn't done and this and that. And I decided, okay, I'm going to listen to some podcast that I had to listen to for work. You know what I mean? But I'm just going to spend all night doing laundry, and I did. It was like 6 or 7 hours. Got the laundry back to neutral. You know what I
mhm,
mean? One time every 2 or 3 weeks, but it just helped so dramatically. It just
mhm,
shifted, the whole level of stress shifted, and we got back to neutral. And that was so important to
mhm,
just to take it on yourself every now and then, and realize that it's not like that's all they do. You need
right.
to you
Yeah.
need to make it easier on at times. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just pointing out that my VA lady has made it to the show just in time for us to close. So that's good. So good morning to you. And if anybody else is joining the show going, hey, why is DL ending his show at 7:30 when normally he's starting the show at 7:30 or maybe a little bit late because he's frequently behind. Um, and again, that's because Todd here reached out to me last night and was like, "Hey, man, I got an opening this week. I'm available. I'm on vacation. Let's get on the show." And then I was like, "Hey, you know what? You want to come on Dad Talk tomorrow night?" And then through the conversation, we settled on how about we get up at 5 in the morning. We do a dad talk. So that's where. All right, sir. I'm going to close this show here in just a moment.
sure.
Final words from you. Final thoughts on anything that we've talked about or anything that maybe we didn't talk about.
Yeah, no, I think this was great. I love the fact that you're focusing on fatherhood and how it works with busy life and that kind of thing. I think this is a great show. I love the topic. I think you and I typically talk about politics, and it
Mhm.
was just fun to sit back and talk about dad and work. So
Yep, absolutely. All right, sir. Well, I'm going to put you backstage. If you need to go, that's fine.
yeah,
If not, we could chit chat after the show. But thank you so much for joining me. And I'm going to put you backstage for just a moment here. All right, folks. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for tuning in. If you're just now getting up, rubbing your eyes, getting your coffee, and you're wondering when the heck happened, I explained it all at the beginning of the show. If you've missed it, please go back and watch it. For those that are regulars and that keep up and hey, this is the last day of the month. How's DL doing on all his numbers, his metrics? I think we're going to be good. I think we're going to hit the numbers. And I've learned some lessons along the way. It's a new experience. So we're getting there. This show just keep doing better and better and better to deliver to you a great show. But for now, I've got to head on out. So folks, I will see you probably tonight. I will probably do another stream tonight because I do have a few more, like another hour and a half roughly that I need to hit before the end of the day. So I'll probably do a show tonight. Normally on Mondays, I do my bill review. So expect a bill review tonight. But with that being said, I will see you later.
Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.